Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is 2001's NUI online game, a flash game that became one of the definitive pieces of media associated with one of LEGO's most popular franchises of all time.
Following that is the Dia de los Muertos inspired film noir, as one of the last adventure games of its era, with a jazz soundtrack that was ahead of its time, 1998's Grim Fandango. Skeletons! It's all about skeletons this week, baby! From the skeleton-like designs of the Bionicle figures to the Kalaka-inspired designs of Grim Fandango's characters. I feel like that was a fitting pairing there.
Yeah, I think it works out. I had been racking my brain to think of anything better than skeletons, because that did come to mind as well. Because, yeah, Bionicle look a lot like skeletons, just in their general... They're robots, but, like, you know. Grim Fandango, obviously, they're all skeletons, so works out.
well, most of them anyway. A couple characters, not so much, but like that's the big gist for sure. Joe, how are you doing? What are you playing?
I played quite a bit over the past week. I rolled credits on new Pokemon Snap.
Yeah.
That game is good. It has some obtuse things that I really don't think should be in the game, but otherwise, solid sequel. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I kind of hope it gets DLC.
That'd be interesting. I think there are even thoughts on, like, is it possibly hinting at what the next region for the next generation could be? Is it, like, Brazil inspired and all that? I think for the most part, that game succeeds on building off of the 20 plus years of expectation for a sequel. You're right. There are some parts that are rough, but for the most part, those big expectations, I think, were met.
Yeah, I would agree on that overall. And then I also finished the Somnium Files. Finally. Got all the roots, rolled the real credits. That game is weird. And somebody needs to teach Uchikoshi that I don't need to see the same flashback scene in an unskippable format 3 times within half an hour. But otherwise, you know, fun time. I liked all the characters except for the one you play as, but it's okay because the one you play as is attached to a good character on her own. So yeah, it's a very interesting, a very good mystery.
I'm sorry, I should have warned you about Uchikoshi's long-winded, overblown endings.
Yeah, it was like 45 minutes of a lore dump, and then the game continued. But otherwise, I am almost done with Village. I haven't finished it yet, Resident Evil Village. It's very, very good so far, but also they've just given up on it not being magic at this point.
Interesting. I've heard some good things about it and some things with how the game's overall plot goes. So I'm excited to eventually play it sometime this year. Don't know if it'll be soon because I didn't play much over the last week, but not yet as of time of recording. But by the time you're listening to this, dear listener, I will be steeped in Mass Effect Legendary Edition. I can't wait. I just got a nice Philips Hue TV lighting setup in my basement. I cannot wait to break that in on the game front with that game, Mass Effect.
Yeah, that sounds real good. I mean, in a similar vein, I will be knee-deep in Famicom Detective Club, maybe, assuming I like it. We'll have to see. I'm very excited for that release.
In the meantime, let's quickly touch on some composer follow-up news. We've covered so many composers on the show. It's time to talk about some game headlines, game industry headlines, and how those composers are involved. We'll start with one of the big game reveals of the last week, and that is Lost Judgment. Finally getting to talk about this. It is the next game from Ryuga Gotoku Studio, and it's a sequel to 2019's Judgment, or 2018's Judge Eyes in Japan. It is launching worldwide on September 24th, 2021. For now. we'll see if that sticks. But we covered the original Judgment on episode 88, and I would assume that means, Hidenori Shoji and Saori Yoshida could possibly be back composing. I'm super excited for this. Does it come with the caveat that Yakuza games are now going to be turn-based like Yakuza 7 was, and Judgment's going to be where the original Yakuza action carries on to? That's a little disappointing, but I guess at least the real-time action lives on, the beat-em-up brawler. I'm also more floored that, Joe, a game that launched as a new IP when we started the show, at least in the United States, now has a sequel.
Yeah.
That's how long we've been doing this podcast.
A AAA one, nonetheless.
In a pandemic.
Yeah. It's wild. I am very happy to hear that this game exists. I have a feeling that they announced this and the Yakuza regular will be turn-based from now on at the same time on purpose, because they knew people like me existed who would be like, oh, then I guess I never get to play Yakuza again. But no, if Judgment exists and it's going to keep being that level of action gameplay, then you know what? I'll take it.
And we should clarify that by Yakuza 7, meaning Yakuza Like a Dragon. That's how it was released here in the United States. I'm also, just one more note, because I'm super excited. I love the original Judgment. I mean, we also loved its soundtrack. It was part of our best of 2019. Also amazed that they got Taki Akimura back to play Yagami once again. I mean, that's stunning.
But also, hey guys, maybe take out tailing. Tailing's not good, and I would prefer you take it out. Or make it fun. I don't know. That's up to you. Meanwhile, last week, I talked about Pikuniku. Well, guess what? It's on Xbox Game Pass now. You can go play Pikuniku. It'll take like 3 hours of your time, and you will be happy with it.
I don't know when it got added, but I found it in my Xbox Game Pass library, so I'm like, oh, downloading that. We'll see if I can beat it maybe before Mass Effect rolls around.
Yeah, it might have been recent. I don't remember seeing it on Game Pass like a month ago, but I'm the chump that paid for Game Pass and then hasn't booted up my Xbox in like 3 months. I should really do that because I have games installed I need to get to.
I mean, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order just came to Stadia. How would I know that? Because I am also a similar kind of chump.
Anyways, this is going to be a lengthy one, but we're going to try and keep it moving. Because mine is a weird, sort of deep pull. Because we're going to talk about the Matanui online game. So, first of all, this game is part of the property from LEGO that was known as Bionicle. Now you're probably wondering, what is Bionicle? So it's very, very important that I cover the general strokes of what Bionicle is, both in terms of where it came from and also lore. So, bear with me. Here we go. Bionicle was a LEGO property that was active from 2000 to 2010. It had a short-lived revival from 2015 to 2016 that I keep forgetting happened because nobody seemed to care. And it was basically a combination of construction toys where you put them together, but then once you had them built, they were an action figure. Most of them had like gears that could have them swing their arms or use their weapons or something like that. Bionicle's existence is really interesting, like just in terms of why it came to be. I can't get into the specifics because we'd be here for 6 hours if I did, but here are some highlights of its story. It was the first LEGO property to feature its own lore and mythos, and it was told through a multimedia approach with video games, animations, and even movies. No LEGO property had ever done that before. It is credited for completely changing the way LEGO handles their original properties, having been a template for future lines like the currently running Ninjago. And essentially, I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that without Bionicle, there'd be no LEGO movie at all. And even more so because not only did Bionicle change the way LEGO does things, it also ensured that LEGO got to keep existing. Because near the end of the 90s, Pokemon came out, and that was the thing all the kids were talking about, and they weren't buying Legos because they were buying Pikachus. And Lego was very close to declaring bankruptcy. So Bionicle comes out, and it was the highest selling Lego property for years. I don't think it has that spot anymore, but I couldn't really find any sources to figure out like what overtook it, because every time I try to look up like top selling Lego properties, it always brings back Star Wars, which is not what I'm looking for. And of course, Star Wars is the answer to that question. What, really? But seriously, let's get into what is Bionicle itself from a lore perspective. Bionicle is a story taking place in a world inhabited by biomechanical beings and wildlife. The first arc of the series, which is the one we're going to focus on for this because it's the time period that this game takes place on the island of Matanui, which is itself split into 7 areas with 6 being villages. The people of Matanui come in 3 varieties: the villagers, normal inhabitants that are referred to as the Matoran, the village elders, wise leaders known as the Turaga, and the defenders, heroic beings themed with elemental powers known as the Toa. Each area and people are themed to different elements and terrain. So you have Takoro, which is a fortress city built in a volcanic mountain, protected by the Toa of Fire Tahu, and led by Turaga Vakama. Onukoro is a village built underground, protected by the Toa of Earth Onua, and led by Turaga Wenua. Gakoro is a floating coastal village, and also the only place where female Bionicle live. Think the Gerudo, but they're not thieves, and there's no man every 100 years. They are protected by the Toa of Water Gali, led by Turaga Nokama. Lake Horo is a tree city built in the canopy of a jungle, protected by the Toa of Air Liwa, and led by Turaga Matau. Pokoro is a desert village, protected by the Toa of Stone Pohatu, and led by Turaga Onawa. And Kokoro, a fortress of solitude built out of the ice in the snowy mountains. It's protected by the Toa of Ice Kopaka, and led by Turaga Nuju, and also is named after the heart.
Yep, I was going to say, I wanted that to be the heart element. Where's Mati from Captain Planet?
And in the center of it all, there is Kininui, which is the Great Temple, which is a cooperative area that all of the villages share. So the Toa not only have power over their element, but they also have masks of power, which are referred to as Kanohi, that give them certain abilities, such as super speed or the ability to breathe underwater. And the general plot is usually told as something along the lines of, let me get my best village elder voice here. Long ago, in the time before time, the great spirit Matanui descended from the heavens and brought the Matoran to a tropical paradise. He gave the Matoran a purpose in life, and so in gratitude they named the island after him. But Matanui's wicked brother, Makuta, was jealous of his well-liked brother and cast a spell on him, sending him into an eternal sleep. Makuta's dark influence flooded the land, but the Matoran did not lose hope. Legend had it that 6 heroes would one day appear in order to defeat Makuta and reawaken Matanui. And there you go. Now you have all of the cursory knowledge you need to understand what the hell I'm talking about when I'm talking about Matanui Online game. So, I mentioned that Bionicle was a multimedia franchise with multiple games and movies, but when people think of Bionicle video games, this is the one they're going to be thinking of. This is the most popular one by far, and also the most important one by far. Also, most of the console Bionicle games were shovelware and sucked, so that didn't work out. So that game would be Matanui Online Game, or MNOG, or Manog, as it is more commonly referred to in text. And I'm not going to say the whole name again because, wow, it's a mouthful. It was a browser game, a Flash-based browser game, which, does that make this the first, straight-up Flash game we've covered?
I think so, yeah.
We've covered games that started as Flash games and then evolved off of Flash, but I don't think we've ever covered a Flash game. It was released episodically throughout the year of 2001, and it was developed by Templar Studios and published by the LEGO Group. It is a first-person point-and-click adventure game taking place during the first act of the first arc, in which the Toa are defending the Matoran from the threat of the island's wildlife, collectively known as Rahi, which have been corrupted by Makuta's influence and have become violent as a result. You play as an outcast from Takoro named Takua, who has been given the title of Chronicler. It is his duty to travel to all the different areas of Matanui in order to make a record of significant events as they occur. There's not really anything special about the gameplay. It's your standard point and click. You pick up items, you talk to people, you use items on things to make things happen, etc., etc., etc. You understand how a point and click adventure game works at this point. All the while, you are able to explore all of Matanui, meeting the Toa and many Matoran on your way as they build up to the Toa's first clash with Makuta himself. And here's where I will ask a thing I asked like 2 months ago when I decided I wanted to do this game. Peter, what are your experiences with MNOG or Bionicle in general, honestly?
Okay, I had no idea that Matanui online game was a thing, existed at all. I have a very, very cursory knowledge of Bionicle as a brand. I feel like my brother, who's a year and a half younger than I am, was into Bionicle, had the figures for the Toa, but even then, like, I remember names like Pohatsu. Oh, okay, I that kind of triggers something, but I mean, that's it. Like, oh yeah, they looked cool, they looked like skeletons. I had to even scroll back up to be like, Takoro, it's the fire one. You start as the fire person. Got it. I know so little, much less all of the video games, films, things that came out of the Bionicle universe.
So, as a child, I was deep in the Bionicle hole. I read the books. I played the games. I watched the movies so much so that I'm pretty sure for a few years I was able to recite the entirety of Bionicle the Mask of Light from memory. I can't do that anymore because I'm an adult and more important things like the other 500 Pokemon that have come out since then have sort of snuck into that spot in my brain. But I had the toys. At one point, the Matoran have their own language, their own written language, basically. And for a while, I could read it. In fact, I might still be able to read it. I was so in on Bionicle in every possible way. I loved it. It might have even eclipsed my Pokemon fandom at some point as a child. It was awesome. It was great. Unfortunately, I don't have any of my Bionicle anymore because my father decided I was too old for them one day and they all went into a trash bag and I never saw them again. So that sucks. But yeah, I was down with Bionicle back in the day. And this game specifically, I have probably played, I haven't played it in a decade, obviously, because it's been a long while, but back in the day, I probably played this game around the same amount of time that I had played Light Kingdom Hearts 2 by that point. It was a lot. I love Bionicle. If you take one thing away from this episode, it's that. I was too into Bionicle, some might say. So I had decided that I wanted to do this game like half a year ago. It must have been. And it was one of those where it was like, I want to do it, but I'm not going to be able to find anything on this game. I was wrong in multiple ways and kind of right, but for the most part, I was wrong because I want to give a shout out to Jake Theriault of Subpixel, the YouTube channel Subpixel. He actually put out an entire 28-minute video and a written article version on Medium covering the development of MNOG. And that's how I finally came to the conclusion of, oh, this is it then. I'm going to do this game. And also, it was because of him that I was able to, for the first time in show history, actually contact the composer to get the information directly from the source.
Hey!
Which is very, very cool. So, thank you very much, Jake. Your video is very, very good, and I'm glad that you pointed me the composer's way. So, Templar Studios actually ended up on the project due to their work on previous LEGO-branded Flash games, mostly for the Mindstorm line, I believe, which was programmable RC cars, essentially. I don't 100% know, but they had just finished a game for LEGO called Storm Runner. And after that game's success, LEGO decided to pull Templar in on the conversation surrounding the upcoming Bionicle line and mythos. They were brought in early enough that while there was a world Bible, it was still under revision, and it was apparently huge. Just like very extensive. And at this point in time, LEGO didn't even know if they wanted Templar to make a game, or an interactive website, or an animated series. They hadn't even thought that far yet. So, they were shown earlier promotional material for the world, and what they ended up pitching was what they described as a Myst-style adventure game, which, if you don't know what Myst is basically the father of adventure games. It's one of the most prolific first-person adventure games ever made, just in general. I've never played it, don't really want to, but I respect what it did. And one of the things they were told was that the story of the Toa was already written, and therefore Templar could not make any of them the main character of this new project, which was kind of a raw deal, because if you think about a Bionicle game, you want to play as the Toa. The Toa are cool. They have superpowers. Why would I want to play as the Matoran? And that was who they were told they had to make a game starring. This was really frustrating, as the Matoran kits weren't even sold in stores. They were a Happy Meal toy. That was the only way you could get them. So, like, in this way, they kind of felt as if they were an afterthought in terms of, like, putting this world together. And honestly, they were kind of right for a lot of reasons, but they still felt that despite this raw deal, they had confidence that they were going to be able to make something special. So, during the initial marketing push of Bionicle, they were kind of in the background. Their protagonist didn't get to be one of the cool heroes, and the story was just a side story, like just off to the left, while the cool main plot with the Toa happens entirely off screen. That plot, the Toa's plot, was planned to be told through the PC game The Legend of NUI, and NUI Online game, though it would start coming out with episodes before Legend of NUI came out, was just going to be seen as like supplementary material off to the side. A big issue that LEGO had, that the team of Templar had to find a workaround for, was that LEGO really didn't like the idea of showing violence in any of their stuff. They were a family-friendly company, and we can't have our characters like taking swords to each other and slaughtering animals and stuff like that. And so they didn't know if they really wanted animations of like their characters killing things with their weapons. So Templar's workaround was to refer to the Toa's weapons as tools, and to make it so that either the weapon was not what defeated an enemy. For instance, the example that Jake uses was like, Golly at one point is fighting a Rahi, and instead of hitting it with her weapon to defeat it, she hits the rocks above it and drops them on it, which seems just as violent to me, but apparently that was enough to be a loophole. Or, if the weapon was what defeated the enemy, it happened off screen and it was only implied. And honestly, they really took this in stride, and they made some really cool, creative decisions around those stipulations. So when episode 7 was in development, two kind of major things happened. One that affected the whole world, and the other that affected MNOG in general. The first is Episode 7 was in development in September of 2001, and Templar is a New York-based studio. So there was that. But then second, Legend of Mata Nui got canceled. And just like that, MNOG was squarely thrown into the spot of they were now the singular definitive teller of the world's lore for that entire arc. Which must have been a hell of a, oh, cool, so expectations are way higher now, and the weight just ended up on my shoulders even more. But while it did increase the pressure, it did also let them give their game a little more narrative impact by the end, and I think that worked really well. Jake has like a big monologue from one of the developers that I would have put in here if not for the fact that this is already going to be too long, but I would definitely go watch that video about how it kind of like emotionally settled with them after the events of 9/11 when putting this game together and how it eventually ended up in terms of the narrative. So while the next two acts of Arc 1 never received their own game, Templar was brought in to make animations telling the stories of the Borak and Borak Hall sagas. Templar was also brought on to make a sequel to MNOG, creatively named Mata Nui Online Game 2.
Oh.
And this one was actually more of a LucasArts style overhead view point-and-click adventure where you played as the Gamatoran Holly, and it was meant to tell a story that would bridge the gap between the end of the Borak Hall and the final act of Arc 1, which itself was told through the property's first film, Bionicle: The Mask of Light. No awards or anything like that I can find, as it was a browser game. I don't think the industry at large paid that much attention to it. Even though this was back in this would have been in Newgrounds' heyday. This was early.
Yeah, so you're telling me it doesn't even have a Metacritic score?
No, it doesn't even have reviews. It was actually taken down in 2003, and then fan demand was so high to get it back that LEGO put it up as a downloadable game on their website in 2006, and that also has since been taken down, but you can find mirrors of that version all over the internet. There's a lot of Bionicle fan sites that have strived to make sure that that stuff doesn't disappear, which I really want to play it again now after I have done all this research. But yeah, no reviews, no awards, no Metacritic score, nothing. Anyways, let's talk about the composer. And like I said, this is the first time in show history that one of us has gone straight to the composer to get the information straight from the source, which is weird, but also I don't think I would have found anything otherwise. In fact, I tried to find other stuff and couldn't. So thank you. His name is Justin Luchter. He allowed me to reach out to him over Gmail. I was able to ask him a bunch of questions, and I was also able to send him my Critical 5 and be like, hey, what are your thoughts on these tracks? So let's get right into it. So according to Justin, he was a sound-oriented child, describing his first time hearing music through a pair of headphones as blowing his mind and making him realize he was really interested in music. And as a kid, the household had a piano, so he took some lessons early in life, and then from 4th grade on, he also joined the school orchestra and played the cello. So, hey, fellow orchestra kids, baby. I was violin, not cello. I was basic, but you know. At one point during his early life, he and his brother wound up staying at a babysitter's apartment for a few days, and this babysitter happened to have a really nice hi-fi stereo. And she let him put on headphones to listen to the radio. And he was flipping through channels and stations and all that, and he ended up finding a station that was playing a bunch of synth music from groups like Tangerine Dream. He says he didn't actually realize that what he heard was synth, though, until years later, having otherwise had experience with a very specific group of artists and styles But one artist in particular that he mentioned buying every record he could find of is Isao Tomita, who he describes as a Japanese pioneer of Moog space music who made amazing renditions of the classics like Holst's Planets and Mussorgsky. I don't know what Moog space means.
I think Moog is a brand of synthesizer?
That might be the case. I don't know. I'm just going to take his word for it that that's what that person is. Eventually, he became what he called the king of babysitting in the neighborhood where he lived, and so money started pouring in pretty well. Man, I never got that experience. I didn't get to babysit anybody and get paid for it. Ugh. He used this money to buy a Sequential Circuits Pro 1, which, upon research, is a synthesizer, and a Tascam Portastudio, which was recording equipment specifically for that kind of thing. And he says, quote, "Once I realized that all the cool things that I liked on records weren't just there, but were actually decisions that someone, a producer, had specifically made, I thought, this is for me, and decided to go to recording school." So basically, as he puts it, his interest wasn't really in becoming a composer. That was not his goal. From what I could tell, he had more of an interest in the production side of things. He loved the experience of putting music on a fixed medium, which at that time would have been cassette tapes, and getting it to sound the way that he wanted. And then the move to digital mediums only served to make him more interested in the entire process, especially getting knee-deep into MIDI sequencing, which I've heard from multiple professors over the past couple years that, like, that was a game changer when that dropped. That, like, we like to think of MIDIs as just a thing that's always existed. No, that's new, relatively, in terms of technology. And he also really liked messing with digital drum machines. At one point, he worked with an individual named Peter Mack, creating music for Mack's graduate school film. And later on, when the recording studio that Justin had been doing his freelance work from was shutting down, Mack just, happened to approach him about getting a job at Templar Studios, which happened to be the studio of which he was one of the founders. He said, quote, "It seemed like, and really was, a dream job that was right up my alley because of my broad experience and interests." This would have been before the Motonui Online game actually began development, and Templar was still sort of building their rapport with LEGO. They had made several games for them already, mostly, again, those Mindstorm games, and Justin was put in charge of sound for these games. And he said, quote, "It was super fun and good, broad training because I was required to, quote, do it all. Sound design, music, and Foley, spotting to QuickTime movies for cutscenes and promos. Apparently they were quite successful despite having to play them over a 14.4K dial-up modem. Imagine your ping. I would rather not imagine that ping. That sounds terrifying nowadays." Man, remember dial-up?
Yeah.
We just lost every young listener we have.
I mean, I remember 56K, but the fact that there were two levels of 28.8 and 14.4.
Yeah. Sometimes I think about dial-up, and it's weird.
There's the whole theory of how knowing the dial-up tone is like the dividing factor between generations on the internet. You either know it and have memories of it, or you don't.
Yeah, that would make sense. Like, there, more than anything, there are children that have probably never heard the dial-up tones before. So, oh man, I'm starting to think we might be old. So when I asked about his process, he said, quote, "I like to really get a sense of the gestalt of the project. What is the point? What is the core? To whom is it speaking? What is the ambiance in its internal world? And perhaps because my background is more oriented towards sound than strictly classical composition, I often start by finding the instruments and patches that I want to use, rather than with melodies and chords and then fitting the aural aspects to that. It's pretty backwards compared to the way many people work, but for interactive media, I'm generally thinking more towards the underscore aspect and supporting the narrative rather than flexing and trying to make the music be a separate thing that may end up taking you out of the story." And you can actually follow Mr. Justin Luchter on Twitter at Renegade Wave, when Wave in this case being like the file type, so WAV. In terms of discography, it was hard to find a lot. He mentioned 2 Mindstorm games that he worked on as being some of his favorites, being Robo Hunter and Robo Hunter 2, which were, from what I could tell, like games where you play a drone that's landed on an alien planet and you have to like investigate it and stuff. And he says that nowadays, most of his work has been in the niche that he refers to as advertainment games. So he's still working in the industry, but he's not really working on anything like big. He seems to have found his niche. He's slotted in, and I respect that a lot. So in terms of historical development research, again, when you have direct access to the composer, turns out you can get a lot of information. He says, quote, "When we worked on Bionicle, fortunately, I had done some underscore mixing for a syndicated TV show where there was never any time and the deadlines were drop dead. Episodic entertainment is like working in the furnace room of a ship. You just gotta keep shoveling as fast as you can. As I recall, I would get a written outline of the episode, but I was working to picture, so as the artwork came off the assembly line, so to speak, I would just try to score things ASAP because the deadlines were so tight, and there was also the post-production aspect where I had to learn Macromedia Flash and put things in the timeline before it got sent out. Audio is always the last thing for some cosmic reason, so there was the added pressure there. Basically, this game released an episode every month, pretty much for the entirety of 2001. So that's what he means by deadlines. Also, this game might actually have been the first time I ever heard Ride of the Valkyries as a child. It's the only public domain song in the entire game, and I don't know where else I would have heard it at age 8. If you don't know what song I'm talking about, you've heard it. You might not know the name, but it's the dun da dun 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 da dun 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 dun. You've heard that song.
I mean, honestly, I would have heard it with Elmer Fudd being like, killed a wabbit, killed a wabbit.
Maybe that would have been the first time. I don't know. It was one of those. It would have been one of those. This is the only 2 places I possibly would have heard it. When I asked him about that, he said, quote, "The episodes were coming out fast and furiously, and there wasn't much time, thankfully, to really muse about what to do. For that particular episode, I felt like our genius graphic artist, Gordon Kliment, had done for Valkyries by the way of Apocalypse Now vibe. And it seemed like a no-brainer, both for expedience and for feel, to use that as a springboard to the rest of that scene's music, which turned into a pretty abstract remix." Apparently, they had talked to LEGO about trying to get a CD release of the game's soundtrack, but it apparently fell on deaf ears. LEGO didn't seem to care at all, which is a shame because nowadays you can only find this soundtrack on YouTube. In general, that's it. That's the only place. Even when I asked Justin, like, hey, do you happen to have like some of the original files? He said he gets asked that a lot, but unfortunately all of the original files are kind of just gone to the sands of time. They're on hard drives that are so old that they have started to rot. They're dead. They just don't work anymore, which is very unfortunate.
I was stunned to find it like pretty good rips on KH Insider. So
really,
take that for what it's worth.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think to look on KH Insider. Damn. He also, when I asked him about that, said, quote, "An aspect of the original files is that they are short loops and loop layers that would comprise on the fly on your computer. Nothing was created as linear songs because of the nature of the flash timeline used to create the game. Although sound effects could be triggered on a specific frame, there was no telling, especially because of the slow internet back then, when an animation or scene would finish playing on any one individual's computer, so the music had to loop until the next scene was clicked on." Which, I never thought about that. That does sound like it'd be a problem.
It's insane, but also explains the soundtrack so much when we get to listening to it.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, you can't find this soundtrack basically anywhere in any official capacity, and the rips that you can find on the internet are all right, but they're not great. But it just so happens that this year is the 20th anniversary of Bionicle, something that sent me into an existential crisis when I read those words the first time. And there is going to be a 20th anniversary conference for the series. Justin himself happened to throw a note my way that he will in fact be in attendance alongside many other prominent figures from throughout Bionicle's history, including Peter Mack, and also happened to let slip that there may or may not be a reimagining of MNOG's soundtrack that could theoretically be released around that same time. Wink. The event itself will take place on August 10th, because 8, 10, bio, it's clever. And it will feature 2 panels. Justin and Peter Mack are involved with the second panel specifically. You can actually submit questions for Justin or the other people on the panels at bit.ly/biopanel2. And also you can do biopanel 1 if you want to ask the first panel some questions. Submission for these questions ends on July 11th. Okay, let's listen to some music. Let's start with our 5 critical tracks. I'm going to start with critical track number 1, Beach Chant. So this is probably one of the most nostalgic pieces in the entire game. If you grew up with this game, you just got hit by a train of nostalgia. It is simple, it is atmospheric, it plays at the beginning of episode 1 where you are on a beach. There's just an open container in front of you, like a giant container that something obviously walked out through because you can see their footsteps, and there's a telescope to your left. And so it just has this soundscape to it. And the waves are not actually technically part of the song, but they add a whole lot in terms of atmosphere. And it's just a really, really interesting piece that is still used to this day. When I asked Justin about it, he said, quote, "Somehow people have latched onto this motif, perhaps because it's easy to remember. I thought about the vibe I wanted to create at the dawn of this new series, and, like often happens with my best work, it just popped out, like the song idea you wrote on the back of a napkin at a bar becoming a hit."
It's effective. I mean, it definitely adds that aura and mysticism, and you're at the beginning of a grand adventure. Is it simple? Yes. Does it play well with, simple loops and not relying on anyone's internet connection or computer speed? Yes. But yeah, wow, it's effective, but yeah, simple, gets the point, and works well, I would imagine.
I mean, in the video announcing the 20th anniversary conference, this is the song that opens the video.
Well, yeah, there you go.
This is a very important leitmotif to Bionicle just in general. For critical track number 2, we have Plague in Pokoro. So this song actually has 2 parts to it. You are hearing the second part in the clip, but the first part plays when you arrive in Pokoro, and there seems to be some sort of sickness going around amongst the villagers, and some of their masks seem to be getting infected with Makuta's influence. And then the second half of the song is when you go investigate what is making Pokoro sick, and you meet up with Pohatu, the Toe of Stone, and he has a showdown with a scorpion-like Rahi called a Nui Jaga. which is what the clip is from. That's the part that it plays. I have always thought that this part's very memorable to me, like in general. When I was trying to figure out these critical fives, I kind of like was going from the angle of what do I remember from when I was a kid? So it wasn't so much just, oh, I like this song. It was more like, do I remember where this song plays and did it make an impact on me as a child? And this scene absolutely did. But when I asked Justin, he said, quote, "It strikes a blow against auteur theory, but this one is perhaps more of a testament to my curation skills rather than composing chops. In retrospect, it feels a bit embarrassing, but in an episodic production such as this, the deadlines are brutal, so I leaned on the loops. This song is mainly loops taken from a sample CD blended in with some synth parts and effects I made. The parts seemed to work for this mini action sequence, but this one was frankly never one I was proud of."
It's interesting to hear when, composers aren't particularly proud of ones, but I would think it'd stand out. I mean, you get the intensity of the battle, and I think it's using neat instruments like the sitar in there, and if it's from a loop, fine, but it's still the fact he pulled it together, and I think it works.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty damn good piece, especially, to be honest, it's a lot like what we learned about Thomas Was Alone, where we were told that, like, oh, the synths overtaking the real instruments was kind of a mistake. He's like, I guess I kind of ruined it by explaining that. But no, this actually kind of makes me a little bit more impressed with, like, this is the one where you're like, I don't really dig what I did there. I don't know. I find that fascinating, actually. Following that, we have critical track number 3. It's Onu Koro. When I asked Justin what he thought of this one, the first thing he sent me was a quote from a YouTube comment of somebody saying, "I've always hated this song." And I don't know why. This song's good. It plays in, as you might guess, Onukoro, which is the underground village. There's a lot of dark tunnels. There's a lot of miners. And in fact, when Justin actually talked about the song itself, he said, quote, "As I recall, Gordon Kliment's animation of the miners had a rhythm to it that was the inspiration for this track's beginnings. Since I was doing the sound design for the series as well, I based the track around the cadence of the sound design of the picks hitting the rock," which reminds me of Mine Windbag Mine.
Yeah.
From Bastion.
Yeah, definitely.
A good 10 years later.
But it's effective, right? I mean, when you're talking about a mining town and, like, you're trying to get that sort of rhythm going, that atmosphere. Oh yeah, where I could hear this, and without knowing anything about the deeper lore elements of Bionicle or Matanui online game, like, it's a mining village. It's something mining going on. So mission accomplished.
Yeah, when I went back and listened to, like, all the village themes, like, this is the one that stood out the most. I really, really dig this one. Dig. Critical track number 4 is Journey to Kini Nui. This is somehow one of those tracks that has just stuck itself in the back of my mind for over a decade. Kind of 2 decades now. Oh, God. Where, like, I haven't thought about it in several years, and then I hear it for 2 seconds, and I'm whistling the melody for the next week. That's what's been happening. The da-na, da-da-na-na-na-na. I've just been whistling that. It's insane that can take me back so hard so quickly. Justin, his input on this track was, quote, "We needed some incidental music, which, since I didn't know my production music terms at the time, I called walking around music." I don't know, that seems explanatory to me. The example in the YouTube you sent is an illustration of how the music kind of flattens out when played in a linear fashion. You can hear there are perhaps 4 separate sections or stems that play in combination: the xylophone, the pizzicato, etc. If you were to play the game, these sound files would play in semi-random combinations with each other, creating a longer, evolving piece, whereas here you can hear, especially toward the end, that they are just laid back to back, which makes it sound more static than it was in real life. Which we've talked about that in other games before with the dynamic soundtracks of like Doom and stuff like that.
Yeah, and overall the struggles of trying to make a soundtrack and compress, all these dynamic stems into a single track. That makes sense. It's amazing, though, how that happens, right? When you hear something from your youth and you're brought right back, it just gets fished right out and you remember all of it.
Yeah, like all of it. It was an experience. Probably one I've had a couple of times in my life at this point. I don't know. So let's get into the final critical track. Critical track number 5. It's Fakama's Talk. This is the ending and the credits as Takua stands on the beach where the game started and is talking to Taraga Vakama. Takua has just finished seeing a glimpse of what is to come, and it ain't good, but for now, there's peace. Justin's take on this track was, quote, "This one I like a lot, maybe my favorite. One thing I wanted for this piece, since it was a wrap-up of the whole thing, was to somehow revisit the opening motif of the series, being Beach Chant, and it had to be a musical statement, not just incidental music. Compositionally, the Beach Chant was just an open fifth, and this is based on that musical fifth as well. This is one of the few where I feel like I nailed the feeling I was trying to achieve, a wistful, plaintive, yet happy vibe, where you've really been through it with your homies, and you're looking back, yet forward, conclusive, yet open-ended. I've seen various YouTube commenters express that this one can choke them up, and I gotta be honest, this one can do that to me as well. Maybe it's a case of you had to be there to get it, but we were there. And yeah, I agree 100% with, it might have been had to be there to really get it, but I was there. I was there from the day one.
And I think it's also important that even if you weren't, like me, you can hear how that would be powerful.
Mm-hmm. I argue so often about video game music can be good on its own, but it's the context that makes it great. And I think this is another great example of that. You can see that this is a good piece, but there's a gap between this is a pretty good piece and I played this as a child and now I am crying. It's a weird gap, and I'm sure we've talked about multiple games that do that to both of us throughout this 2-year show. I don't know. I will have forgotten everything I said this week, next week, but So let's get into the cutting room floor. My first track for the cutting room floor is Fight in the Hive. This song plays during a battle between the possessed Liwa and Onua, taking place in the hive of some dragonfly-like Rahi called NUI Rama. Really cool animation sequence. You should definitely look into this, even if you don't really know a lot about Bionicle, it's probably the place where it does its best at really showing off Templar being very, very creative with how they showed fights, because they couldn't show violence, so they had to get creative with it, and it is really good. I think that it's the coolest animation sequence in the game, bar none. That's saying something, because for the time, at least, like, they're Flash animations, but they're really, really impressive Flash animations, especially for 2001. And I also found out that apparently this song is one of the few songs in the game that is not actually by Justin. And he actually does not seem to know who did make it. He says, quote, "This music was given to Templar Studios to cross-promote another Bionicle property that was happening at the time. At first I was dubious because it was from another composer and had a different vibe than I was going for in MNOG, but it was perfect for action sequences and the fight scenes, which were quite time-consuming if you want to punctuate the details in the scene. I had the feeling before that each fight scene would need a bespoke composition, but I just ended up using it for one of those, and it was perfect. Like the Flintstones, if you've ever seen that old cartoon series, where there were only about 5 pieces of music that they would repurpose for everything, but it was fine."
It does sound different, and so that makes sense. It's a different composer. Almost sounds Matrix-like in a way.
A little bit. I mean, that would have been the time.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been the time for that aesthetic. I wonder if the other Bionicle property in question was Legend of Mata Nui, the PC game that got canceled. I don't know. That seems logical. That seems like it'd probably be what it was for, especially if that game got canceled. So, I don't know. And for the second track on the cutting room floor, I have Waking of the Bow-Rock. The Bow-Rock are the second act villains of the Mata Nui arc, and they're a lot of fun. Honestly, I really like the Bow-Rock. They're probably some of my favorite, like, villain group that's basically wildlife ever. And this song plays when Takua accidentally wanders into their nest and sees them start to wake up, and then runs away. It's not the most memorable piece, but for me, it was a very memorable moment because, again, I love the Bow-Rock. But it's also the song that got my favorite response from Justin, because all he wrote was, quote, "This one belongs on the cutting room floor." And that's the whole thing. I lost my mind. It was great. So what will I never forget about this game? Bionicle was my childhood, and this game, by extension, was a huge part of my childhood. It's up there with Pokemon in terms of things I loved as a kid. I really wish I still had my figures. I really, really do. But sadly, you know, sometimes things happen and you don't have the things from your childhood anymore. But I just generally really love Bionicle, and I'm very happy I got the opportunity to learn more about this game that I played so often as a kid in my dark room on the PC. And just, I don't know, it took me back, and now I just want to play it again.
I'm really glad that you got the opportunity to reach out to the composer. I think, that's something that takes weeks to do, and we don't, truthfully, necessarily always have that freedom and that opportunity, but you've been playing this for a while, and I'm glad it panned out for you, and for us. Yeah,
it was a very cool experience. We were talking for like 4 months before this episode, so it's been a long time coming, and I'm glad to finally get it down on digital format. I don't know. Anyways, usually for our transition, we like to talk about a fan remix or fan cover, mostly for the reason that this soundtrack's not really readily available in a lot of places. Couldn't really find one. Not super surprised about that. Hopefully, if the reimagining comes out, wink, wink, Maybe some more people will do some covers, but for now, I'm just going to pick another song from the game. It is Le Coro Band. It plays when you just saved all the Lecorans from the hive that Battle in the Hive takes place in. And they're having a party to celebrate how they're not slaves to dragonflies anymore. So please enjoy that. We will be right back.
From skeletal mechanical beings with special superpowers to dead skeletons that are alive in the land of the dead, let's talk about Grim Fandango.
That was a hell of a vocal Ouroboros you just drew there.
I mean, sometimes when you gotta tie some games together, it happens. So, Grim Fandango released on October 30th, 1998 for Windows on PC. This was the Friday before Dia de los Muertos, which, good release timing, nicely done. But as far as the game goes, it would be this way for a very long time, as Windows kept getting updated, and people would play archived versions through scumware and things like that. We would have to wait for the game to be remastered on PC, PS4, and PlayStation Vita on January 27th, 2015. Wow, that's almost 17 years later. That's crazy. Then a mobile version on Android and iOS arrived on May 5th, 2015. Nintendo Switch got a version on November 1st, 2018. That's a little more lining up with the Day of the Dead. And then Xbox One only just recently got a version of Grim Fandango remastered on October 29th, 2020. The game is developed and published by LucasArts. Grim Fandango is a third-person adventure game with 3D characters and objects and static 2D backgrounds. Unlike moving a cursor for pointing and clicking, you move your character to interact with characters and objects to converse with them or solve puzzles. Unlike the earlier 2D LucasArts games at the time where they were adventure games, the player is informed of objects or persons of interest not by text floating on the screen when the player passes a cursor over them, but instead by the fact that the main character will turn his head towards that object or person as he walks by, noting that they are someone or something to interact with. It definitely falls in that obscure adventure game category, though. Some of the puzzles take some, I think, leaps of logic and talking to characters in specific ways. It's a lot of the try everything with different items in your hand sort of situation. I feel like if you are trying to play Grim Fandango now for the first time, there is no shame in having a walkthrough by your side.
Yeah, absolutely not. Old LucasArts adventure games, while beloved, are infamous for essentially working on dream logic sometimes.
It takes some leaps, for sure. But it's a great story, and so the plot of Grim Fandango involves that it's the land of the dead, where the recently departed souls aim to make their way to the land of eternal rest on the 4-year Journey of the Soul. Manuel, or Manny Calavera, is a travel agent at the Department of Death in the city of El Marro, and he arranges travel packages for clients to expedite their journey to the land of eternal rest based on the choices that they made in life. So, if you are very good and pious in life, you may get that express ticket to go there lickety-split. But if you are a terrible person in life, you just might have to walk there. Overall, Manny has been forced into his job as a travel agent to work off a debt, quote, to the powers that be. And he's frustrated with being assigned clients that made poor living choices. And he's threatened to be fired by his boss, Don Copal, if he does not come up with better clients. So, since he's so desperate, Manny steals the information of a client. This client is Mercedes Meche Colomar. And he kind of takes her file from his successful coworker, Domino Hurley. Now, the department computers assign Meche to the entire 4-year journey, even though Manny believes that she should have had a guaranteed spot on the number 9 luxury express train due to the pureness of her heart in her life. After setting Meche on her way, Manny investigates further and finds that Domino and Don have been rigging the system to deny many clients double-end tickets, hoarding them for the boss of the criminal underworld, Hector Laman. Laman then sells the tickets at an exorbitant price to those that can afford it. Manny recognizes that he can't stop Hector at the present moment, so instead, with the help of his driver and speed demon, Glottis, he tries to find Meche as she has set out on her journey on foot. Where will this journey take Manny? Can he uncover Hector's nefarious crimes? And will Manny and Meche be reunited? Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Grim Fandango?
I have watched a long play of Grim Fandango and never played it, despite I'm pretty sure owning it on Steam, PS4, almost on Switch. I haven't bought it on Switch, but part of me wants to. I own this game on multiple fronts, and I've still never played it. So all of my experience comes from just watching a long play it. And I loved what I saw. This game has such a fantastic aesthetic. The characters are all a lot of fun. Domino Hurley is one of the biggest jerks ever. Like one of the most well-written jerks there have ever been. And I don't know. It's a really good game, and the soundtrack is like A+.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're right. The aesthetic, the writing, the characters, it's so good, but I feel like it is that old adventure gameplay that does hold it back today. So yeah, if you're going to play it, definitely have that guide nearby, like I did when I played it several years ago. When I played the remastered version, I started on PS4, and then it was at a time where if you bought it on PS4, the Vita version came along with it for cross-play or cross-buy, and so you could put your file up to the cloud and pull it down on your Vita, and I think I played the back half of that game on Vita. I don't remember too much of the end of it. I think it got a little obtuse, and I was kind of a little relying more on the guide to just get through the game. But I mean, that first bit of the game is so memorable, and catching different Let's Plays of it just to kind of refresh my memory. I mean, so much here. It's just a fantastic game, and really good to dig into the soundtrack and pull clips that like, oh my gosh, I remember that song so well. I'm really excited to talk about this game because it is one of those classic game soundtracks, and we'll get into why. But first, for the development of Grim Fandango, it is the creative genius of Tim Schafer who directed the game. And Tim Schafer, you may know for games such as Day of the Tentacle, Psychonauts, Brutal Legend. So Schafer had conceived a Day of the Dead themed adventure before production of his previous game, 1995's Full Throttle. And so both of these concepts for a Day of the Dead game, which would become Grim Fandango, and Full Throttle, both these concepts submitted at the same time to LucasArts. And they looked at the two and they're like, let's go with this Full Throttle project because we think it's going to have a wider appeal to audiences. And sure enough, its success led them to say, okay, you can make this Day of the Dead game. So development on Grim Fandango started in June 1995, just after Full Throttle's release. At the time, it was an attempt to revitalize a dying adventure game genre, especially coming off critiques that Full Throttle was seen as too short. Overall, Grim Fandango was developed on a $3 million budget. But Grim Fandango was not the originally conceived title, as Schaefer had originally considered Deeds of the Dead for the title, as he originally planned Manny to be a real estate agent in the land of the dead. Other potential titles included The Long Siesta and Dirt Nap.
I like The Long Siesta. The Long Siesta is a strong title.
It's a good title. I feel like Dirt Nap, though, is too short and too curt. But it would be a funny game title.
It would be, but like at what cost? Grim Fandango is kind of like the perfect title for this game. It's fun to say, and it's perfect for the whole thing.
I was even watching a Let's Play. I'm like, what does Grim Fandango even mean? I'm like, how is it brought up? I was watching a Let's Play, and they were talking to this character, and she was doing like beat poetry. And mentions Grim Fandango in there. It's like, oh, they said the title.
I remember the slam poetry. That was a weird part of the game, and also probably one of the funniest.
Snapping the bones. So Grim Fandango is considered one of the first uses of the scripting language Lua in gaming applications. For those that are familiar with that, some nerdy factoid here. Its success led to the language's use in many other games and applications, especially at the time, including Escape from Monkey Island and Baldur's Gate. The character design in Grim Fandango, you may look at it, it's just like, skeletons. Okay, but it's based on a calaca, which is a figure of a skull or skeleton, usually human, commonly used for decoration during the Mexican Day of the Dead festival, although they are made all year round. Frequently, they're shown with marigold flowers and foliage, and these figures would have continued representation in media through animated films, such as The Book of Life and Coco, and games, such as Guacamelee.
Isn't Severed also sort of that?
Yeah, sort of, yeah. I feel like Drinkbox kind of leaned into this aesthetic for sure.
Yeah.
So the game involves 3D characters on 2D backgrounds, as I mentioned, and this was a first for LucasArts. They created more than 90 sets and 50 characters for the game to be created and rendered. Manny's character alone comprised 250 polygons, which, a lot for the time. Not so much now, but for the time.
A drop in the bucket now. That's like Nathan Drake's foot.
So, while the pre-rendered backgrounds were 2D, they were actually based on 3D models. And this helped when the camera changed in scenes, so you could just only needed to re-render them instead of having someone else redraw a completely different scene. So that's a clever way of working it out. Overall, while the Aztec and the Day of the Dead theming is strong throughout the game, so too is the film noir setting. There are these 1930s Art Deco design motifs, and the true inspiration was drawn from films like Double Indemnity, in which a weak and undistinguished insurance salesman finds himself entangled in a murder plot. The design and early plot are also fashioned after films such as Chinatown and Glengarry Glen Ross. Several scenes in Grim Fandango are directly inspired by film noir classics, such as The Maltese Falcon, The Third Man, Key Largo, and of course, most notably, Casablanca.
How has my roommate not played this game? The Third Man is my roommate's favorite film of all time. I've never seen it, but he talks about it a good amount when it comes up. So how in the world has he not played this game?
Good question. But as someone who only just recently saw Casablanca for the first time, I know, shocker. Yeah, wow. I mean, Manny owning a club in the second act of the game. Yeah, ding, ding, ding. There are also a couple characters that are like directly plays off of characters in Casablanca. Like that's probably the biggest movie that it draws from. It was also important to cast Latino performers as voice actors to have the authentic feel of some of the Spanish slang and overall some of the references and everything to the Day of the Dead. So that comes off super, super well. The game was originally intended to launch in the first half of 1998, but even with the delay to the later half of the year, elements had to be cut from the original version. Schaefer said it would have taken like another 1 or 2 years to implement everything that they had envisioned. And then after it came out, nothing. Well, then Disney acquires LucasArts in 2013. The IPs are in limbo, and they're looking to be licensed out. And so Tim Schafer was able to acquire the rights to Grim Fandango with some financial assistance from Sony, who oddly enough was also looking to acquire the rights to it, and they decided to work cooperatively. And so they started the process of building out a remastered version within Double Fine Productions. See, Schafer had apparently tried to acquire Grim Fandango from LucasArts earlier, but frequent changes in the management at the time stalled progress. Overall, Grim Fandango Remastered was officially announced at E3 2014. When it came to reviews, Grim Fandango reviewed very well, with a Metacritic average of 94. Praises included the direction, writing, costumes, character, music, and atmosphere. One reviewer noted that it would make for a superb film. And I agree. Watching it, if it were cut down and made into an animated film, I would watch the heck out of Grim Fandango for sure. Some criticisms included some difficulties that were experienced with the interface. There's also a certain learning curve that was required to get used to. Some poorly selected camera angles for some puzzles, according to some reviewers. And also just loading times from a CD-ROM, because that was the way you played games on PC at the time.
Yeah. Yep.
I think PlayStation was also discovering that as they went into CD-ROM.
Yeah, I didn't play PC games back then. In fact, I don't think I played a PC game for years, but even I have heard the horror stories of old about how, every game required like 7 discs and also took forever to load.
No thanks. I'm glad with the digital games we have today. That's for sure.
Solid state drives. Eat it, 1998.
Let's go, the future! Grim Fandango was thoroughly considered the best adventure game of 1998 by many outlets, some even noting it as the best PC game, GameSpot in particular. It was nominated for 5 Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences awards, the award show that we now know as DICE, including being nominated for Game of the Year and Outstanding Achievement in Sound and Music. It did win Computer Adventure Game of the Year. The game achieved sales of approximately 500,000 units by 2012, according to Schafer, making it around 50% fewer than what Full Throttle had achieved. So people commonly consider it a commercial failure, even though LucasArts stated that, quote, Grim Fandango met domestic expectations and exceeded them worldwide. So even though it did become profitable in 2000, it still contributed to the downfall of the adventure game genre on PC, which would only later be revitalized when dismissed LucasArts employees would go on to establish Telltale Games in 2004, and even then it would take years for Telltale to have their big hit in The Walking Dead. In July of 2000, Tim Schafer and many of the people who worked on Grim Fandango would go on to establish Double Fine Productions and find success in their first title, 2005's Psychonauts. But overall, the legacy of Grim Fandango, the combination of film noir and the adventure game genre, was kind of a first of its kind, and it was a pretty natural fit due to the script-heavy nature of both. And so this would later help influence games with similar themes like the Ace Attorney series and L.A. Noire, both of which we have covered on the show before. And of course, it was notable enough that a remaster was made. Obviously, if you're going to play the game today, go play that. The remaster is honestly great. Tim Schafer mentioned that he's had thoughts of a sequel, but they've never really materialized into anything, especially with the way the original game ends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like the story of the original game is a fine ending. I don't think they need to do anything else, but also, I'd buy a Grim Fandango too.
Yeah, I think that's how I feel as well. So, the composer of the soundtrack for Grim Fandango is Peter McConnell. And we've covered Peter McConnell before on the show before. He composed Sly 2 Band of Thieves. We covered that in episode 41 of Original Soundchat. So who do we cover? Where do we reach? Let's talk about the sound engineer, the person who engineered and mixed the music on the original game. This is Jeff Kliment. Jeff Kliment doesn't have much of a profile or a presence online, but he seems to be currently based out of Oak Park, Illinois. He got his Bachelor of Arts in Broadcast Communication Arts from San Francisco State University, and his MA in Art Education at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Overall, his professional career began in the 1980s at Russian Hill Recording in San Francisco, where he helped establish and maintain the studio's reputation as a world-class post-production house. His engineering credits include worldwide releases with recording artists such as Jefferson Starship and Rob Wasserman, and major motion pictures by Chris Columbus, Francis Coppola, and Philip Kaufman, among many others. But yeah, not composition work, just some sound and engineering work there. After a 15-year stretch at Russian Hill, he moved to LucasArts, where he managed the sound department and created soundtracks for classic video games such as Grim Fandango and Star Wars Episode 1 Racer.
Yeah!
His academic career began in 2005 at the San Francisco Art Institute, where he served for 2 years as Director of Instructional Resources and Media Services. During this time, he also taught audio production classes at City College of San Francisco. Since 2008, he has been a professor at Flashpoint Chicago, which is part of Columbia College Hollywood. So yeah, he's someone who now teaches recording engineering. He's a professor these days.
Nice.
But back in his days of doing the work, his discography, as far as games go, involves being part of the sound department for LucasArts games from 1997 to 2005. So some of these include The Curse of Monkey Island and Escape from Monkey Island, Grim Fandango, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, and Star Wars Republic Commando, and more. The soundtrack of Grim Fandango, the music of Grim Fandango, has its whole big, massive Wikipedia page. You don't get that often with game soundtracks, let me tell you. So
I know we've gotten it for one other game before, and I don't remember which one. But, like, yeah, that's a rare occurrence. And that's how you know, like, oh, people really care about this soundtrack.
Absolutely. So it was worth digging into, and here's what I could generally distill from it. So yeah, Kliment engineered and mixed the music on the original game, and he was the lead sound designer on the remaster. Peter McConnell, of course, composing the music for both original and the remaster. And McConnell developed 3 types of musical pieces: event-triggered episodes, ambient pieces, and underscoring for cutscenes. When it came to the process, they first recorded Tim Schafer talking about the game's plot points, and they'd find a way to put that in the framework of the game. McConnell would then come up with a theme by humming a tune, and then record it in a cassette, play it back to Schafer to get his approval, and then eventually replace the plot points narration with those tunes. They then developed a MIDI score to serve as a mock-up, which then led to the recording of the final score that would include live musicians for some parts. So it's a step-by-step process, but honestly, it worked.
That's a really cool process, too. I don't think we've heard of one quite like that before.
And it created just an amazing soundtrack. It's a score that combines orchestral score, South American folk music, jazz, bebop, swing, and big band music, inspired by the likes of Duke Ellington and Benny Goodman, as well as film composers Max Steiner and Adolf Deutsch. It also has various influences from traditional Russian, Celtic, Mexican, Spanish, and Indian strings culture. So you have this great accomplishment in the original Grim Fandango score. And then when the idea comes up to, wow, if we make a remastered version, what can we do? Well, they discovered that a large number of backup files were made on digital linear tape, or DLT, which Disney and LucasArts had been able to recover for Double Fine for the remaster. Except there's one problem. In, 2013, 2014, the company had no drives to read the tapes that were made in 1998.
Oh, no.
So, former LucasArts sound engineer Jory Prum had managed to save a DLT drive and was able to extract all of the game's audio development data from the tapes. McConnell called this recovery process overall a chain of miracles, since, quote, if any of the links had not held up, we would have had very little to work with at all. So, after those original Pro Tools sound files were recovered, McConnell found that some of the samples he had used originally did not sound good, especially by today's standards. So, the team opted with the decision to reorchestrate the score. McConnell thought that the original game's music was, quote, a little bit ahead of its time, and it suffered for that. I mean, it's great to listen back to now, but I mean, yeah, you compare it to some other game music at the time, and wow, it shined on PC, and maybe it was thought as like too much at the time. I don't know. I have no frame of reference for playing Grim Fandango at launch. So remastering tasks were assigned to 3 teams. There was an audio team at Sony who recorded live tracks and remixed 45 minutes of jazz tunes, which included a few new live parts and some new solos. There was another team at Pyramid Studios in San Francisco that replaced old samples with better sounds in another 45 minutes of music, and they remixed all of the cutscenes in 6 languages. And then finally, the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, who Double Fine had worked with on their kickstarted game Broken Age, they recorded about 30 minutes of orchestral music. McConnell estimates that he alone put about 800 hours into the remastering project.
Ooh, boy, that's a lot.
Pretty amazing. And we'll get to the songs soon because they're amazing for 1998 and they're only better remastered. I think it's just incredible. Game Revolution praised the original game score as, quote, one of the most memorable soundtracks ever to grace the inside of a cranial cavity where an eardrum used to be.
Give that person some money. Give that person a raise. I applaud you.
So it's a good description. In its 2014 list of top 100 games, PC Gamer acclaimed Grim Fandango for including, quote, one of the best soundtracks in PC gaming history. And in 2017, Fact Magazine also listed it as one of the, quote, 100 best video game soundtracks of all time.
I'd agree with that placement, honestly.
Yeah. So we're dealing with an all-timer here. And let's get to the 5 critical tracks for Grim Fandango. Let's start with the first one here. This is Grim Fandango. So you hear this, and you're like, oh, wow, it sounds amazing, right? Well, this is going to be the only one on the Critical 5 here, and even on the cutting room floor. This comes from the remastered soundtrack from Grim Fandango Remastered. I think it's even like the PS4 menu music, like when you hover over the game and it plays a little bit. I don't think the game has like a traditional menu screen like you think, but yet this theme has become like the de facto main theme for the series since its remastered version. It was even represented when Video Games Live, which we mentioned when we covered Tommy Tallarico and Earthworm Jim, Video Games Live did a performance of Grim Fandango and put it on one of their albums, and this is how it starts. So like this has kind of become a main theme in a way. I think it's kind of a spooky melody overall, which kind of fits that Day of the Dead theming, but it is just epic in its execution. And I think it really shows the accomplishment of what the remaster album turned out to be, the reorchestration involved, and great recording, great mixing. Sounds so good.
And it's really like a testament to how well this game does the noir setting. That when I hear the song, I'm like, oh man, Peter McConnell sure sounds like he listened to the soundtrack of LA Noire a lot, which would be absolutely hilarious if the soundtrack of LA Noire influenced the new song in Grim Fandango Remastered, the remaster of the game that inspired LA Noire.
That would be pretty crazy. I hear you for sure. Okay, so that's the one from the remaster. We had to get that one kind of out of the way. That was like a new song. But now let's get to the original classics from the 1998 release. And you know, the one track that stands out whenever I hear it, even just what's a song from Grim Fandango? Number 2 on the Critical 5. This is Compañeros. At the beginning of the game, Manny walks outside the travel agency, and there's a festival going on in the town on the street. And this is music that is like, I think even playing diegetically in the festival. It sounds so good, even on the track. I think we, just before the clip, but you even hear someone say, 1, 2, 3, 4, like kind of counting out the beat before they play this. And it's a mariachi band. The mariachi sounds so good here. And it actually features live musicians from a real mariachi band that McConnell knew or made contact with. And they're from San Francisco's Mission District. In fact, all of the live performers from the original Grim Fandango soundtrack, they were connected to the Mission District in some way. But this song, it is so pure. It is a delightful earworm. Just always sticks with me for, the Day of the Dead theming, the Latin-inspired music. And also, I want to give a shout out to Ninth Heaven. It's another track on the soundtrack. I didn't want to overload it on the Critical Fiber cutting room floor here, but it's another similar kind of piece. Includes some flute melodies. And it's another one that's like, it just brings you right back. But this is the one that I always think of like, it's Compañeros here.
Ninth Heaven narrowly missed being on my cutting room floor because, all of the mariachi stuff is, it's so good. This isn't my favorite song in the game, but it is very, very, very close second. I love this song. I'd love mariachi. That more games need more mariachi. It's one of the reasons why I need to play Guacamelee.
Yeah.
I still haven't. But it fits the theming of the world so well, and I think referring to it as an earworm hits the mark. It's just really good.
It's delightful, especially when you're trying to figure out the early puzzles in the game's first act. But then we move on to Act 2, and number 3 on the Critical 5. This is a great one. This is Casino Calavera. Now you're getting the sense of the big band jazz, and oh my goodness, what a piece. Look, 1998, and that's coming out of your PC. Just amazing. Great live performances, oh my goodness. So, yes, in Act 2, Manny owns his own casino. It's not Rick's, but it'll do. So, Casino Calavera is my favorite piece in the game. I think it establishes that big band swing rhythm right away. Manny has power now. Some, but it's power, and he'll hold on to it, and just gets that feel going right away with that jazz, and then the screaming clarinet jazz solo comes in. Benny Goodman-like, in a way. Eventually it leads to the piano picking it up, but wow, the performances are spot on. And yeah, you can imagine in 1998, that's incredible. That just sounds so good.
High five, the mind meld did work once more, because this is also my favorite song on the soundtrack. 100% with a bullet. Compañeros, again, comes kind of close, but Casino Calavera's the one, baby. It's so good. And it's also got a little bit more of a swing aspect to it, which I really, really love swing stuff. It's one of my favorite genres to hear in a game. And we don't hear it very often, so it's refreshing. And I really, really, really like this song.
I feel like the only soundtrack that has even tried to come close to this is Cuphead. And granted, almost 20 years later, that sounds amazing, Cuphead, right? But this was doing it in 1998. Fantastic. Number 4 on the Critical 5, we continue in Act 2. This is Swanky Maximo. So first of all, any title that has swanky in it is doing something right. So this is the theme of the High Roller Lounge in Act 2. And especially when you're speaking to Maximo before you leave Rubacava. Just these grungy instruments here. Like the bass clarinet, even bassoon maybe coming in. And then the horns coming in, the muted trumpet coming in. I mean, this is what's coming out of your speakers. This is what they're putting on that CD-ROM. I mean, yeah, talk about being ahead of its time in 1998. You really feel like you're kind of getting into the criminal underbelly here. And it's swanky.
I love muted trumpets in this genre of music. It's one of the main reasons why one of my other cutting room floor tracks is there, because I absolutely, and I like the character, but it's the muted trumpets. This is what you think of when you think of 1920s, walking into a club or something. In my opinion, this is the definitive sound of that era. They sound like such a weird mix between this trumpet is dying and music is being made, and it's this perfect middle ground. And I think this song absolutely takes full advantage of that. I absolutely adore the muted trumpets.
We're going to hear lots of muted horns through the rest of, especially the cutting room floor. And it's just something that really gives a lot of character to the jazz theme in this soundtrack. But first, we'll wrap up the Critical 5 with another leitmotif important in the game. This is Manny and Meche. So this was another theme that was represented well in the video game's live performance of Grim Fandango, so it's an important one, especially when it's called Manny and Meche, the two main characters of the game, the protagonist and his potential love interest, or at least the girl that's going to help him get out of the situation he's in. And it's just this wistful tango. A great performance, this soulful violin that's on the melody here. It just makes you feel for those characters. You feel the moment. Their interactions are so genuine and great. And the music just sells it so well. I think it's a good kind of conclusion where you have these like upbeat jazzy pieces, but there's some emotion at the heartstrings here.
First of all, as a former violinist myself, damn. Damn. But also, we don't talk about tangos on this show very often. In fact, you know what I think is the last time we talked about a tango on an original Soundchat? Was Sly 2 Band of Thieves.
Yeah, maybe. Peter McConnell
also
there. Oh my
by
gosh.
Peter McConnell. Like, I'm pretty sure that's the last time. I mean, that violinist is putting in the work. You can hear that. That has to be a live instrument, right? That's a live instrument? That has to be.
Yes, has to be.
Yeah, there's no way that's a MIDI. Especially not in 1998. There's no way that's a MIDI. You can feel that performer is really putting in the work, and I really appreciate it. It's gorgeous.
Some tracks on the cutting room floor. Joe, you have 2. Hit me with them.
The first one is Smooth Hector. Much like when you're talking about how if your song title has swanky in the name, you're doing something right, I believe the same thing about the word smooth. Except it's a little weird to be talking about that in this context because this is a theme for Hector LeMans, the main antagonist of Grim Fandango. So, I mean, yeah, he's still smooth. This doesn't feel like an antagonist's theme.
It doesn't. And that kind of makes it seem more interesting, right? Like the clarinet's also going pretty hard here, but just it's being smooth. And, for a boss of the criminal underworld, got to have some charisma to him, right?
Yeah. I think it fits the setting very well because he's a crime boss. He's not like running out and shooting people in the streets. He's a crime boss. It's just a good little piece. But my main happy addition to the cutting room floor is Gambling Glottis. Got more of them muted trumpets? And also Glottis, I had forgotten his name until we started getting ready to record this episode, but I remember him being a really fun character. He's a elemental who drives a car fast, and it's great. He sticks with the Manny basically through all 4 acts, and it's a fantastic character. And this song is so fun, and again, it's the muted trumpets. Come on, man, give me more muted trumpets. Let's add that to the list. We got piano, acoustic guitar, and muted trumpets now.
Yeah, absolutely. Glottis is the comic relief of the game. He's such a delightful character. He kind of reminds me of Teddy from Bob's Burgers.
Yeah, yes, 100%. You are correct, sir.
Like his voice and his lack of tact is like 100% Teddy. Also tempting to include the track Bone Wagon, which is like a surf rock piece when he creates his car masterpiece and he can go screaming fast because he's a speed demon.
Yeah, that was also on the short list for my cutting room floor for sure.
I have a couple pieces though for my cutting room floor, and one of these is Mr. Frustration Man. So it's amazing when we say muted trumpets, muted horns, just how many varieties there are with that. Shows the recording quality, the creativity involved with this. And I feel like this is more muted, but just like in a softer way. So this plays inside the travel agency in the first act after Don gives Manny the ultimatum of you better find a good client or you're going to be fired. And so McConnell describes the track as, quote, sometimes bebop, sometimes melancholic, sweet or sensual. And just overall observes that, quote, whether led by a saxophone, a trumpet, or a guitar, jazz is the predominant style of the Grim Fandango soundtrack, all reminiscent of the snug atmosphere of casinos and bars between the two world wars. And yeah, that's it exactly. This muted horn sounds amazing. The extra light, jazzy percussion, and even get supporting guitar in there. I think it's a really good piece, especially early on. A muted one, but a good one nonetheless.
Yeah, I think you said it all basically. It's a very, very interesting piece, especially considering where it plays, honestly.
And then the other one we'll touch on here is High Tone Fandango. This one plays outside of Casino Calavera in Act 2 in Rubicava. And this one is one that just, stuck with me. I'm like, oh, yep, this has got to go somewhere. I really like the sound of this. I remember this, especially, again, the muted trumpet, but it's sharper this time. It's right. It's higher pitched, and it's just has more of a point to it. And then the dropout of all the musics for the trumpet to continue, ba-da-da-ba. Like, oh, it's so good. I think, and based on my ear, I'm guessing here, but the main melody that kind of goes at the start of the piece, at the start of the clip, also with the word Fandango in the title, I feel like they took this piece and that's what they turned what number one on our Critical 5 was, the Grim Fandango remastered title track. They just kind of really amped that up and reorchestrated it. But this was the original that it came from.
I could hear that. Your logic makes sense there at the very least. But yeah, it's a real testament. You mentioned earlier, like, we keep talking about the muted trumpet, but then it sounds almost completely different in every song. It's just really, really competent use of that instrument. It's just cool.
It sure is. Just like jazz is cool. We love talking about jazz on this show. So what will I never forget about Grim Fandango? I would say no other game has this kind of style, this kind of energy, this aesthetic, and then you build it into this soundtrack for the time, the kind of jazz that's on display here. I don't think we'd see it until Cuphead, honestly, for a totally different genre, but for this to lend the atmosphere to a story, to a narrative with great writing. Granted, it's a game I have forgotten a lot about playing because it's just LucasArts adventure design that can get a bit obtuse in its puzzle design. But as far as the characters, the story, it's just a great time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm actually kind of surprised that more games don't hit this style, but also kind of not, because the amount of resources you must need to be able to do this kind of soundtrack well are not exactly like, on one end, an indie developer probably isn't going to be able to get that unless they have a lot of ins in the music industry. And then a AAA developer, I mean, they're not going to be making a game like Grim Fandango nowadays. That's just not a thing that's going to happen. So it lets it have carved out its own little niche in terms of like soundtrack genre. And yeah, I think it's wholly unique. I also don't remember a lot about the game's story, but I do remember that it is very funny, and just really great world design and et cetera, et cetera. It's all great. Except for the fact that the Land of the Living is a weird,
oh my God,
terrifying collage art style. Yeah.
It sure is. I saw that on the Let's Play and it was like, oh, I forgot about this. This is like that.
I'll never forget about it.
It's almost like the Amanda Show.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, it's just that weird, unsettling paper cutout people. Oh gosh, yeah, thanks for reminding me, Jesus. Well, when it comes to different styles of characters, these two games, it's all about skeletons. You have the Bionicle characters of the Toa and all of those different types of characters with skeletons and mechanical design, and then the Kalaka of Grim Fandango and the skeleton designs there. So good to bring these two games to the table. We've talked a lot about both these games. There's a lot here. I think it's a real strong episode overall. So thank you for listening this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at Pete Speakeasy. Joe is over at String Pixel. If you were following him before, you got to refollow this new Twitter account at String Pixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want, hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That is where Joe's Odd podcast Smasherpieces is hosted, and you can find Smasherpieces and Original Soundchat on podcast services all around the globe, wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify. Spotify has a feed with podcast episodes and the like, but it also has a playlist where if we talk about a video game song on this show and it's on Spotify, it's getting added to that playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
Well, obviously, since MNOG never got an official release, obviously that is not on Spotify. Fingers crossed for the hypothetical reimagining that may or may not be coming in August. Let's hope. But Grim Fandango is, specifically the remastered version of Grim Fandango, which in this case, I'm going to go ahead and count it. I'm going to throw those on the playlist because, I mean, hey, they're still really, really good.
Absolutely. I think that's the right call for sure. When you're done listening, you can find us on social media at Soundchat OST. Leave some feedback for us. How are we doing on these episodes? And also suggestions for games to cover in the future, because that's one of our big goals for 2021 is to do more of those. We're going to get our merch store situation sorted out, make some more bonus tracks for you. In the meantime, Joe, who are we talking about next week?
I will be talking about Ryota Kozuka.
I will be talking about Hidehito Aoki. Getting back to some game releases in this spring 2021 calendar. Should be a fun time. Well, to play us out, let's get to a YouTube fan cover, remix, what have you. I found a channel called The Game Brass, and they brought in another group called Mariachi Entertainment System.
Oh, that's a great name for a band.
Yes, so MES joins The Game Brass for a Grim Fandango suite, and this part of the medley in particular is their take on Compañeros. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.